In the name of the God who created us, in the name of the Christ who teaches us, in the name of the Spirit who journeys alongside us, welcome home, children of God. Beloved friends at First Presbyterian, welcome this morning as we gather together as God's people in God's name, separated, of course, geographically, but united as one in spirit and in heart. But welcome to worship this morning. I am glad you are here. Please do take a moment and check in on YouTube chat, on Facebook messages, YouTube messages, email, text, whatever you need to do. Let us know you're here, because as we do every Sunday, we're going to count up the number of people who worship and send $1 for everybody who worships to a local ministry. This morning is the first Sunday of the month. So it means our beneficiary this morning is Food for the Multitude, a ministry that provides hot meals to residents of Carter County every Saturday. So just by you being here this morning, checking in, letting us know you're here, we're going to give $1 for each one of you to Food for the Multitude. So thank you for being here. Thank you for checking in. Please know that your gift of time this morning makes a real and tangible difference in the lives of people in the community and in the world. As always, we're going to continue virtually passing the peace every Sunday until we can be together again. So please do send me a new photo every so often so I don't have to Photoshop an old one, trying to shame you into something new. Just send those to me throughout the week, and all the photos that I get by Wednesday night I will include in the upcoming Sunday's video. This morning is a very special Sunday. This is our annual More Light Sunday, so we're going to be hearing from members of our More Light committee with a very special meditation this morning. Our own Carmi is going to be offering the sermon, the reflection this morning for us. So thank you to Carmi, thank you to everybody on the More Light committee that has worked very hard to put together a worship service for us this morning and celebrate not only the gifts of our LGBTQIA friends broadly, but especially the gifts of those within our church, and to honor and celebrate the life of our own Tony Hedrick this morning too. So, friends, as always, I love you, I miss you, and I am glad that you are here this morning. Thank you for your presence. Today is a day that God has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it as we worship together. Amen.
Today's invitation to worship is Welcome by Mary Oliver. There are times when, unanticipated, a moment captures the spirit, shadows cast upon a moss-tinted fence, the simple symbiotic union of grass and dirt supporting an old red maple outside the window, being in the presence of a child's wonder, looking across a pond painted with the stroke of nature's brush. And in that sacred moment, we are visited by a peace, a joy, a thirst, a longing to travel deeper, wanting to be deeper, a sense of being held tenderly, dearly, yet offered freedom and invited to live intentionally our wild and precious life. Time is suspended, the spirit stirs, and somewhere from deep within we hear welcome.
You know, as I sit here in the sanctuary, there's nobody here but me and Wayland. It's quiet, and it's very peaceful. And I'm sitting in a spot that most people, when they come in, they like to sit in the back. And this one person that I'm thinking about always like to be in the background. And this was his spot most of the time. If he wasn't at the door handing out bulletins, or if he was greeting everybody and giving little hugs, or if he was down in the kitchen at the coffee pot. I'll never see the coffee pot again in the kitchen without thinking of Tony. I'm speaking of Tony Hedrick, and Tony was a quiet person, but you knew he was here because things got done in the background. He never wanted praise. He never wanted anybody to sort of acknowledge that he was here. He just did his thing, and it got done, and we knew that if Tony was here, it would get done. He was a short person, but he was as tall as that steeple up there. And he was an unassuming person, but he filled this space with a smile, and everybody knew him. And he did the group on Sunday nights for the LGBT, the gathering, and he took care of all the food and set up the tables and the chairs and did everything. That we'd ask him if he needed help, and he said, well, if you want to help, you can, but if not, I've got it. This past Thanksgiving, we had Friendsgiving here, and Tony came and helped us and set up and brought his famous green beans in his crock pot. That was his thing, was green beans. And Tony was just a big part of this church and the LGBTQ community here. And on this Sunday, when we think of More Light, Tony was part of More Light. And Tony will be missed in this church. I talked to his sister this morning, and they're all doing fine. They're doing well, and she wanted me to thank the church for everything they've done, all the calls and cards and everything, the flowers. And she just wanted to let everybody know that she appreciated it. And this time of meditation, I know this isn't usually what a meditation is in our church, but I thought we should think about Tony. And just in the quietness of the church, I'm going to get up and just let the camera be on his seat here for a few minutes, and then we'll close it out. Thank you.
Today's reading is from Galatians 5, 1-6. For freedom Christ has set us free. Stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to a yoke of slavery. Listen, I, Paul, am telling you that if you let yourselves be circumcised, Christ will be of no benefit to you. Once again, I testify to every man who lets himself be circumcised that he is obliged to obey the entire law. You who want to be justified by the law have cut yourselves off from Christ. You have fallen away from grace. For through the Spirit, by faith, we eagerly wait for the hope of righteousness. For in Christ Jesus, neither circumcision nor uncircumcision counts for anything. The only thing that counts is faith working through love. Additionally, we have some responses to a survey sent out to LGBTQIA plus people. We asked, what's difficult about church and faith as an LGBTQIA plus person? They said, it's difficult for me to focus and sit in on a sermon when I don't know if a church is affirming. I'm scared of getting hurt, so just not knowing is hard. the ambiguity of acceptance or welcome, not being fully accepted and affirmed, seeing people suffering because of their identity in the church, encountering others who think they have it all figured out and insist that people who identify as LGBTQ+ are sinners, being scared of people who may be hostile.
Sweet love, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Sweet love, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. I looked over Jordan, and what did I see? Coming for to carry me home. A band of angels coming after me, coming for to carry me home. Sweet love, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Sweet love, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. If you get there before I do, coming for to carry me home. Tell all my friends I'm coming too, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home.
Thanks for the opportunity to share with you all this morning. I consider it a great privilege to call myself a part of this church community. Today, More Light Sunday, is a Sunday our church designates each year at the beginning of Pride Month to celebrate the LGBTQIA+ community and remember the struggles we have faced. For the sake of brevity, I'm going to use queer as an umbrella term for the LGBTQIA+ community, so you know what I'm talking about. I love that the name of this Sunday and our queer outreach committee is More Light, because when queer people are fully included and celebrated as a part of our church family and communities beyond that, there's just that, more light. It's hard to imagine our church without the queer people who make up a part of this family. The music time would be different. The passing of peace would be different. When some people cover a whole lot more ground than others. The benedictions and welcoming of new folks would be different. Can you all imagine what your first time stepping into church would have been like without some people running up to you afterwards to introduce themselves and make sure you felt welcome? First Pres would not be the church that it is without our queer members. We bring more light here. Some people would assume that because we're a fully affirming church, we're a gay church. But that's not true either. We're a group of people that recognizes there's room for everyone at God's table. And once a year, we have a drag show featuring Safanda Christmas that gets more whoops and hollers than any other performance of the year. If you haven't seen it, you're missing out. Many church friends who aren't a part of the queer community themselves choose to worship with us because they want to eat at a table where everybody is welcome. They recognize that they too are better off when queer people are valued and celebrated in the communities they belong to. So I feel honored to get to share this message with you today, both as a part of the queer community and as a part of this church community. I'm not sure why they picked me out of all the queeros, but I'm gonna guess it's my keen knack for acting like I know what I'm doing. It's interesting coming into More Light Sunday this year. Things are a little bit different than they were last time. Last year we had a mini Stonewall March reenactment right down the aisle of the church, and we got to hear Gregory sing in person, which was a real treat. This year we're in a time of social distancing, a time where the difficulties faced by queer people who aren't accepted by their families, health departments, or communities are exacerbated. I'll try to give you a few examples, though they by no means represent all queer people or their circumstances. Right now, there are non-binary folks who are forced to live at home with families that refuse to call them by their chosen names and pronouns. Could you imagine being quarantined with people who call you by a name you don't like all day? People receiving hormone therapy are having a harder time getting them on their regular schedule. Could you imagine a medical process that you've spent years preparing for, saving for, maybe even praying about, that you have looked forward to for so long because it will allow your body to more closely align with who you are, being thwarted, completely out of your control? Could you imagine wishing you could call a friend or family member for support and connection during this difficult time, only to have the conversation peppered with passive-aggressive comments and questions about your sexual orientation or gender identity and choices? Because the people you love can't accept who you are. For some queer people, that is their reality right now. And though we may not be able to change it all with the snap of our fingers or positive thoughts and prayers, it is important to acknowledge the difficulties they face. Let us remember also that not all queer people experience hardship equally, that our Black and brown siblings are also facing the continual injustices of racism in our world, and that trans women of color are violently killed every year in the United States, so much so that violence against trans women of color has been called an epidemic. I invite you to add to the list of names of deaths we are mourning the 11 trans women of color whose lives have been lost to violence so far this year. Dustin Parker, Nulisa Luciano Ruiz, Yampi Mendez Arrocho, Monica Diamond, Lexi, Johanna Metzger, Serena Angelique Velasquez Ramos, Leila Peleas Sanchez, Penelope Diaz Ramirez, Nina Pop, and Hele J. O'Regan. For so long, trans women of color were pushed to the sidelines in the fight for queer rights, despite the fact that they were some of the leaders of the Stonewall riots that ignited the movement for queer liberation in the United States. So when we talk about queer liberation, if we strive to honor God in doing so at all, we must give intersectionality a priority. As Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. put it, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. We must recognize the privileges that white, male, cisgendered, able-bodied, economically stable queer voices have, and work to highlight and learn from the voices of those who have for far too long been marginalized within our own queer community. Those are some pretty heavy realities. And standing on their own, they can feel pretty hopeless. But we believe in a God who has good news for the oppressed and marginalized, who took on every aspect of what it is to be human and hurt in this world and was not overcome by it, even though it led Jesus to death on a cross. In our reading today, Paul proclaims this good news boldly, saying, "It is for freedom's sake that you have been set free." And Paul is not making this statement lightly. He's been building up to this proclamation for 4 chapters, speaking to the Galatian people who have been conquered by Rome, told that they must become circumcised like Jews in order to enjoy the promises of God, made to jump through all kinds of hoops by oppressive forces in order to have a seat at the table. And Paul won't have it, and we shouldn't either. In Christ, there are no hoops to jump through. There's no identity that will make you more worthy of love and participation. There's only a call to come to the table exactly as you are, because we all need you there. It is for freedom's sake that we have been set free. It is for freedom's sake that God calls you by your chosen name and embraces you fully. It is for freedom's sake that God celebrates the self-sacrificing love of Jesus that we imitate in romantic love of all kinds. It is for freedom's sake that God does not abandon us in our despair. It is for freedom's sake that we are called together to the table of God, to come, to commune, to know and be known. We were made to live in freedom with God, each other, and all created beings. And who has a greater insight into this freedom than those of us in the queer community? For we know that there is freedom in that step of loving ourselves fully. Freedom that allows us to extend love to others, even though that freedom is not necessarily easy. We face rejection and opposition when we step fully into living our lives. And so we walk alongside those still in hiding and torment, knowing that their freedom and our freedom are inseparable. We scream at the top of our lungs for drag queens who dance and sing and embrace the beauty of self-love and celebration. Is there any more beautiful display of freedom? I had a more personal reflection on this freedom recently when we began social distancing due to COVID-19. I remember feeling the weight of the distance, the friends I wouldn't get to see in person, the weight of not being able to see my students face to face anymore, the loneliness and fear of not knowing when this would end. And I remember thinking I would choose the current circumstances over those I faced a couple years ago any day, because quarantine as a free person is infinitely better than regular life as an oppressed person. A couple of years ago, I worked as a missionary. I was out, but not wanted for who I was. The organization I worked for wanted me quiet and single with no support or solidarity. I was viewed as a potential threat to big money conservative donors and people's tightly held theological beliefs that did not have the freedom to ask questions or think differently. It was the classic hip evangelical environment where allies were beloved, but queer people were treated as less than. And I don't need to go into the details, but I can tell you it didn't end well, and it didn't end fairly. Our team had issues, and I had some responsibility in that, and I was given 2 weeks' notice to pack up my life in Uruguay for furlough in the US with no promise I could return. And harder yet, no one in power who seemed to want me to return. The discrimination against queer people in the church is often hidden, spun in a way that it doesn't get labeled as discrimination. The victims are gaslit, told that the discrimination they have experienced is not real or valid, and the people in power come up with logic to explain everything that tends more to their inner need to feel like a good person than to the truth. That was one of the worst experiences of my life. And it came at the hands of Christians, no less. I share this because in the first weeks of social distancing, when things were getting hard, I let out a deep breath and remembered things will be hard now, but they will never again be as bad as they were when I was in Uruguay and participated in my own oppression. because I no longer allow people to treat me as anything less than an equal. And I no longer participate in spaces where I am not valued for all of who I am. I remember crying my eyes out in my car on the drive home from my HR onboarding at my current job. I cried because we had gone over the non-discrimination policy, which includes sexual orientation. I had never before worked in a place where I knew the only thing I would be judged on is my work performance. I had never before been valued as a full equal. And the relief and the joy and the freedom brought tears to my eyes. Never again would I participate in my own oppression. I would live free because it was for freedom's sake that Christ has set us free. The call to be free is a calling from God, our beloved Creator. This call has changed everything in my life. I love myself fully because I respect myself fully. And I do not let people or systems treat me as anything less than an equal. It is for freedom's sake that we are called together to the table of God, to come, to commune, to know and be known. We were made to live in freedom with God, each other, and all created beings. As Paul said in our reading from Galatians, in God's world, the only thing that counts is faith working through love. May we become free so that we can live fully into love with our faith. Because it is for freedom's sake that we have been set free. Amen. I sent out a survey asking members of the LGBTQI+ community what they needed to hear from church. So I've asked the Connollys, who are both church members and my neighbors, to read these truths to all those who need to hear it. If you are a member in the LGBTQIA+ community, may you hear it and believe it. If you are not, may you live out these values, not just in word, but in deed.
Welcome. We're glad you're here. And we'd like you to know that all that you are reflects the image of God.
We know that it's been a struggle as you've been trying to figure things out for yourself, where you fit in the world, and that people haven't always been as welcoming as they could have been. And we want you to know that we commit to making this a safe space for you to figure things out, and for people who will advocate for you and even just listen. Thank you for sharing your uniqueness with us.
We see you and we love you.
We're glad you're here. Welcome. We want you here.
Without end, amen, as it was in the beginning, as now and ever shall be, amen.
Y'all pray with me. God, Creator, Savior, and Spirit, thank you that you are with us today and for the beautiful communion that you have called us to, the freedom that you have called us to. We pray that you would guide us as we work towards a church that reflects the diversity of love, of life, of all people that you have created in your image and called into community together. We pray for your freedom to be felt and for that freedom to move us into a faith that's lived out through love. As we go out today, may you receive the freedom that God has given as a warm embrace to journey alongside you, no matter where your road may lead. And may you extend that freedom to others as your faith is lived out through love.